So I'm going to share with you a solid framework to live by. So this here is a meta-analysis of news revealed headlines that drove the most interest in stories. Right? So recency. As recent as possible, quite literally recency. How recent was the event? If you could include recency into a piece of headline, this would help drive a lot more attention. So this section here is going to be helpful for individuals that want to create clickbait type of headlines. If you could somehow put something about, I just made $100,000 within an hour versus I made $100,000 last year. The one that says I made $100,000 within the last hour is going to grab more attention than the headline saying I just made $100,000 last year. So think about recency when you're creating content, especially when you want to grab somebody's attention. The next point that is important is relevancy. Relevancy. So a good example is doctors pay more attention to information that affects doctors. Carpenters pay more attention to information that is related to carpenters. Real estate agents pay more attention to information that relates to real estate agents or brokers. This is important because a lot of times we like to do broad messages. And what I found is that these broad messages are not as effective as you think. This is where niching down makes sense. And this is how to niche down. Is one thing to find your own niche, right? It's one thing to find your own niche, but it's another thing to tailor your marketing message to your audience. That's niching down even further, right? So yes, obviously find your niche, find what business model you want to be in, what industry you want to focus on. But once you do that, you have to know how to talk, how to communicate with the niche that you chose. So this is not going to be something that's overnight, but the points that I'm going to go through here will help you to niche down even further, to niche down your marketing message that much further. So far we talked about recency, right? So do your thing, do your best to make sure to make the event as recent as possible. You know, change the wording so that maybe you could say we just had a student graduate yesterday, and he was able to generate an additional $3,000 after graduation. Relevancy. Personally meaningful. So nurses, they pay more attention to stuff that affects nurses. Doctors, they pay more attention to stuff that affects doctors. Local business owners pay more attention to things that affect local businesses. If you can, including prominent people, so authorities, celebrities, right? If you can, make sure to put a celebrity in the content, right? Name drop somebody. Maybe it's a lesson that you learned by Jeff. Maybe it's a lesson that you learned by Alex. Maybe it's a lesson that you learned by Elon. Mention that. Mention prominent people and use this when it comes to your copywriting. Use this when it comes to your creating headlines. It's going to make that much of a difference. And you don't have to lie, by the way. You could also say things like, hey, I learned XYZ from Elon. Or maybe share a lesson that Elon communicated and then relate it to your business, or what is it that you're doing, or create a fact or statistic that Elon shared or Jeff Bezos shared. But use these power players' credibility as a way to break through the algorithm and gain more credibility. Proximity. So people pay attention to what's close to home. What am I talking about? So if you run an ad, a broad ad in the United States, yeah, you'll get some clicks, you'll get some results. But if you run an ad specifically targeting people in Texas, and you live in Texas, and you make the ad specifically for people, for real estate agents in Texas, and you make a success story about a real estate agent that recently generated 30 leads in 30 minutes in San Antonio, Texas. That right there is applying recency, relevancy, and proximity all in one. So try to include as many of these frameworks into your copy, into your ad as possible, especially when you know the target audience that you're reaching to. Conflict. So if you actually create conflict, a lot of people like to engage, because this world is very, if it's not this, is that. It's not always like that, but if somebody doesn't agree with one thing, they most likely agree with the other side. So if you create conflict in your copy, you're more likely to get engagement than if you try to make one way the only way. So maybe ask a question, hey, would you prefer running ads with video or no video? Leave a comment below, right? Would you prefer having a man as a president or a woman as a president? Leave a comment below. These things will generate more engagement than simply saying, I think men should be president, or I think women should be president. By creating opposing ideas in your ad, you will definitely get more engagement. So the last two ones that I'll mention is being unusual. There's a good example that comes to mind when it comes to unusual, and his name is Frank Kern. If you could look up Frank Kern and read some of his video sales letters, or watch his presentations, and also read the letters that he creates, he's probably one of the most unusual, unique, rare individuals in the content copy creating space. A lot of times we are taught to be so grammatically correct and make sure that we follow rules. He's completely gone the opposite direction. And by studying him, you'll realize why he's successful. And then ongoing. Stories still in progress are dynamic. So I started off with relevancy. Celebrity was the next one. We have proximity. Proximity. We have conflict. We have unusual. And then we have ongoing. Using this framework, it doesn't mean you have to include every single one of them on your next ad. But if you think about this when you're creating content, it's likely to get more engagement. It doesn't even have to be an ad. It could be something that you, in fact, now we have ChatGPT. So you could literally say, create a piece of content that is relevant to local businesses. Make sure to include stats and examples that Jeff Bezos shared on a recent podcast. Keep the example to close proximity to all business owners in Florida, and also make sure to make the piece of content rare or unusual. And from there, now you've created a piece of content that is most likely going to get a lot more engagement than the content that you've been creating. So with that, if you have any questions, reach out, keep growing, keep developing. And like I always say, nobody cares about you as much as you do. And nobody's going to believe it in you until you do. You have to believe in yourself, because if you don't, nobody else will. Keep growing.